The sky over Iron Hangar was on fire. Every A-10 on the line had turned into a screaming torch, and the SEALs who depended on them could do nothing but watch the inferno consume their last hope. Then, through the flames, someone moved. Not a pilot, not a rescue team. A woman in a torn flight suit, walking straight into the burning hangar, as if the fire itself had been waiting for her. And that's when the battlefield went silent. You're watching the story Scape, where impossible orders collide with unforgettable courage. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's go back to the morning the sky fell and the woman who rose through the smoke. 04:30 hours. The first rocket struck before dawn. A-10s lined up like sleeping giants, hit straight through their fuel tanks. Fire erupted, slicing the air with thunder. The hangar shuddered. Sirens wailed, men shouted names that were never answered. The SEAL recon team stationed along the southern wall could only watch as the aircraft they were counting on, those brutal, low-flying angels, became wrecks of burning aluminum. Their radios crackled. All pilots down. Repeat, all pilots. Static. Silence. No one was coming to save them, or so they thought. The hangar roof caved in, throwing steel and flame into the desert wind. Out of the smoke stumbled a few crewmen, half-blind and bleeding. Then came someone else, moving differently, controlled, deliberate. A woman, helmet in hand, face streaked with soot. She wasn't screaming or running. She was scanning, like she was searching for something lost. "Who's that?" one SEAL asked, squinting through the heat shimmer. Nobody knew. She wore no rank patch, just a flight suit too worn for a mechanic, too calm for a survivor. She stopped beside a crippled warthog, one engine coughing black smoke, the shark-mouth paint half melted off its nose. Her gloved hand touched the fuselage, softly, almost reverently. It was the way a pilot touches her own jet. Another explosion rippled through the tarmac. The SEALs ducked. She didn't. She just turned toward the cockpit ladder and started climbing. "Ma'am, you can't go in there," one of them shouted. She didn't even look back. The SEAL leader, Harding, grabbed his binoculars. That's when he saw it. A half-burned insignia on her shoulder. 2 wings, and a single word barely visible beneath the ash. Iron Widow. His pulse kicked. That name had not been spoken in years. Iron Widow, a call sign buried with a pilot who was supposed to have died in a classified strike that went off-map. And she never existed, Harding whispered. And yet there she was, climbing into the cockpit like she'd never left it. Inside, the woman flipped a master switch. Systems hummed weakly. The right engine coughed. Then another explosion rocked the hangar, shaking debris loose from the rafters. She didn't flinch. Her hand settled on the throttle. One SEAL covered his ears as the GAU-88's test cycle spun once, its brutal metallic growl echoing through the firestorm. Harding lowered the binoculars. "That's not a mechanic," he muttered. Another SEAL asked, "Then what is she?" He stared at the burning hangar, at the single jet beginning to roll forward through the smoke. "She's payback." The A-10 lurched ahead, engines roaring through the blaze. As the roof collapsed behind her, the SEALs watched in disbelief, because for the first time that morning, the sky wasn't falling. It was answering. The engines came alive with a roar that didn't belong to this world. The wounded A-10 rolled through the smoke like a wounded animal that refused to die. Its landing gear grinding across the broken runway, each vibration echoing against the burning hangar behind it. The SEALs could only watch, the heat from the blast washing over their faces as the woman inside adjusted the throttle with surgical precision. Harding, their team leader, stood frozen. He'd seen jets take off under fire before, but not like this. The runway was half gone, the air was black with smoke, and yet somehow that battered warthog was moving.
"That jet shouldn't even be running," he muttered. Another SEAL beside him whispered, "Neither should she." The left engine caught, spitting sparks before stabilizing. She held the throttle at full for a heartbeat, letting the turbines scream, and then she released the brakes. The aircraft surged forward, cutting through the haze, wheels bouncing over craters until the ground finally fell away beneath her. For a moment, she was nothing but a dark silhouette rising through a sheet of flame, a shape that shouldn't exist, but did. Down below, the SEALs fell silent. The desert wind carried only the low, rumbling growl of the A-10 circling above. They had lost their pilots, but the sky hadn't lost her. The radio came alive with a burst of static, then a voice, calm, unhurried, and cold as steel. "This is Iron Widow, confirming visual on hostiles." Harding held up his headset. That call sign didn't belong to anyone alive. The file had been closed, the pilot listed as KIA, the aircraft destroyed in a classified mission that no one ever admitted happened. But there was no mistaking that voice. It was her. He opened the mic. "Iron Widow, this is SEAL Recon. We thought you were—" "Save it," she cut him off. "Mark your coordinates and keep your men behind cover. You'll have 30 seconds. No one argued. They'd seen what she could do. Harding gave the signal. The SEALs dove for whatever protection they could find. In the air, she rolled the Warthog until the ridge below came into view. Her right hand rested on the trigger control, her eyes tracking the enemy armor advancing through the valley. The jet's instruments were failing one by one, but her instincts filled the gaps. She'd done this 1,000 times before, once as a soldier, now as something less human and far more dangerous. The GA-8 Avenger cannon spooled up with its familiar metallic snarl. Then the desert shook. The sound ripped through the valley, a mechanical thunder that turned night into daylight. Shells slammed into the ridge with surgical precision, tearing through armor, detonating ammunition, and erasing an entire convoy in seconds. When the echo faded, the silence that followed was almost sacred. Smoke drifted through the shattered terrain. Harding rose from behind the wall and looked toward the sky. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. A younger SEAL beside him crossed himself and said, "She's not human." He wasn't entirely wrong, because the last time Iron Widow took to the air, she wasn't supposed to come back. Inside the cockpit, warning lights glowed across her dashboard, temperature rising, hydraulic pressure dropping. She ignored them all. Her focus was absolute, breath steady, eyes scanning the horizon for the next target. Every move was muscle memory, each decision haunted by ghosts that had never left her. The right engine coughed again. She eased back on the throttle, feeling the vibration through her seat. "Not now," she murmured, half to the jet, half to herself. "You and me, one more run." Below, Harding's voice came through the static. "Iron Widow, North Ridge, multiple armor contacts advancing." "Copy that," she replied, tone unwavering. "Time to remind them why they fear this sound." The A-10 banked hard, diving through the smoke with the precision of a predator. The second attack run was slower, colder, more deliberate, a sculpted act of vengeance rather than rage. The GA-8's rumble rolled across the battlefield again, each burst carving light into darkness. From the ground, the SEALs watched in disbelief as the firestorm swallowed the horizon. Harding lowered his binoculars slowly, eyes wide. "She's the ghost they warned us about," he said. Above them, the A-10 leveled out, its right engine trailing smoke like a comet's tail. Inside the cockpit, the warning tone grew louder. "Fire, detected, engine 2." She silenced it with one motion, gaze locked on the clouds ahead. "Not yet," she whispered. "We're not finished." Then she pushed the nose down and disappeared into the storm. Below, the seals watched the burning sky close behind her. For a heartbeat, they thought she'd been consumed by it. But then the thunder rolled again, deeper, closer, and they realized she hadn't fallen. She was hunting.
The desert below was nothing but a graveyard of burning steel. From her cockpit, Iron Widow could see the wrecks glowing like embers scattered across the sand. Smoke coiled upward in silent columns, twisting through the light of the rising sun. For a brief moment, she forgot the mission, forgot the pain in her right shoulder where the harness had cut deep, and simply stared at the destruction she'd created. It wasn't pride she felt, it was memory. Her right engine was dying. Warning lights bled red across the panel. The turbine was running too hot, each vibration threatening to tear it apart. She adjusted trim manually, bypassing automatic control. It was risky, but so was breathing out here. Come on, old girl, just a little longer. Down below, the SEALs began to regroup. Their radio chatter was fractured but alive, something that hadn't existed 10 minutes earlier. "We've got movement on the east flank. Copy that, pushing north." The sound of their voices steadied her heartbeat. They believed again, and they didn't even know the truth, because Iron Widow hadn't come here to save anyone. She'd come to finish what Command tried to erase. She banked left, low enough that the shockwave of her own flight peeled dust off the ridges. Her reflection flickered in the cracked canopy. Eyes that didn't blink, face streaked with soot and oil, the look of someone who'd already died once. The left engine groaned but held steady. The right one was another story, whining, coughing, begging for mercy. In her headset, Harding's voice came through again, stronger now. "Iron Widow, you've cleared the ridge. Repeat, we're in the clear." "Negative. They're regrouping east of the canyon. You've got 30 seconds before artillery range." "That's suicide. You can't watch me." She dropped altitude fast, the world narrowing to a blur of rock and dust. The A-10 was made for this, low, ugly, unkillable. The GAU-8 cannon spun again, but this time there was no triumphant roar. It was strained, hollow, like the voice of a ghost remembering what it used to be. Each shell landed with terrifying precision. Each burst carved a path through the convoy attempting to flank the SEALs. But as the last round fired, the right engine gave a final shudder and caught fire. The alarm blared. Engine 2 critical. Fuel leak detected. The cockpit filled with smoke. Her vision blurred for a second. Instinct took over. She cut fuel to the burning engine, rerouted hydraulics to the left, and leveled the wings. The A-10 wasn't flying anymore. It was surviving, held together by her willpower alone. For most pilots, this would have been the end. For her, it was where the mission began. Through the haze, she saw movement in the canyon below. Enemy units repositioning heavy guns, trying to take her down before she could turn again. They didn't know the irony. The woman above them had been one of their targets years ago. The op that killed her squadron had started right here, in this same stretch of desert. The memories came back sharp. The radio silence, the betrayal, the order to withdraw that never reached them. She'd been left behind, listed dead, forgotten in a war that refused to end. And when she'd finally crawled out of that wreckage, she swore one thing: if she ever flew again, it would be on her own terms. Now she was keeping that promise. She pushed the throttle until the good engine screamed in protest. The jet shuddered but held course. Her oxygen mask hissed with every breath, the glass in front of her vibrating from the strain. She could see the convoy breaking apart, panic setting in,
But there was still one last artillery truck loading its round. She didn't have altitude, or speed, or backup. Just will. She armed the final payload manually. "Harding," she said into the mic, voice steady but distant. "If you've got prayers, use them now." "Iron Widow, break off. You'll never—" "You're right. I won't." She pulled up slightly, locked the targeting reticle, and released the last 2 rockets. The explosion that followed tore through the canyon like a second sunrise. For a few seconds, she felt nothing but silence. Then a sharp jolt threw her forward. The shockwave had clipped her tail. The left engine sputtered. Controls went heavy. The Warthog began to lose lift. The jet that had refused to die was finally falling. Below, the SEALs looked up as the smoke trail curled downward. Harding's voice filled the channel, hoarse and desperate. "Iron Widow, eject! That's an order!" There was no reply, only static. The A-10 tilted sideways, flames licking the fuselage as it descended toward the dunes. But at the last moment, just before it vanished into the smoke, the nose lifted slightly and the engines roared one final time. She wasn't done yet. Harding watched through the binoculars as the Warthog disappeared behind the ridge. Seconds later, a flash illuminated the horizon. Not a crash, but a detonation. And through the haze, a new sound followed, the echo of engines climbing again. "She's still up there," he whispered. "My God, she's still up there." The desert went quiet after the explosion. No one moved. The only sound was the dry wind pushing through smoke that smelled of jet fuel and burning sand. The SEALs stared toward the horizon where Iron Widow's Warthog had vanished. The fireball had been too bright, too sudden, the kind that ended stories. Harding lowered his binoculars, throat tightening. "He's gone." But even as he said it, the sky answered back. At first, it was just a low hum, almost like thunder rolling under the ground. Then it grew, deeper, closer, familiar. The kind of sound that makes veterans look up out of reflex, the kind that means salvation or damnation, depending on whose side you're on. And then they saw it, cutting through the smoke, nose down, engines howling, a shape that should have been gone. The A-10. She'd climbed back out of the crater of her own destruction, one engine trailing fire, the other roaring at full power. No one could explain it. The comms erupted with disbelief. "She's alive! Impossible! She was hit dead on!" But Iron Widow was no longer flying on fuel. She was flying on fury. Inside the cockpit, alarms still screamed. Hydraulics bled pressure. Oxygen readouts flashed 0. She tore off her cracked mask, coughing through smoke, and forced the stick level. Her vision tunneled, the edges darkening, but her instincts remained sharp. Below, the enemy had already begun to reorganize. Heavy transports pulling back, mobile artillery repositioning, radio signals lighting up the intercept bands. They were afraid, and they should be. She switched frequencies, overriding military encryption codes that hadn't been used in years. Her voice cut through the static, low, steady, almost ghost-like. "This is Iron Widow. Target reacquired." For a heartbeat, the channel stayed silent. Then a scrambled enemy voice replied, not English, but clear enough to translate through panic. "No, it can't be her. She's dead." Iron Widow smiled faintly. "Not today." She angled down. The wounded jet dove through the rising heat, the wings trembling but holding. Dust spiraled around her like smoke from a furnace. Ahead, She saw the ridge where the enemy had regrouped, hundreds of meters of armored vehicles, trucks, and gun nests preparing to fire. They'd written her off once. They wouldn't get the chance again. Harding watched from below as tracer fire lit the sky. The A-10 wove between them, weaving in and out of the smoke like a phantom. He felt every pass in his chest, the vibration, the rhythm, the impossible defiance of it all. The GAU-8 Avenger thundered again, not as a weapon, but as a heartbeat. Its rounds rained down in a straight line of fire, cutting through steel and silence alike. The ridge disintegrated, tanks folded like tin cans, even the ground seemed to recoil. When the barrage ended, the radio went dead again. The smoke thickened until the sun disappeared behind it. Harding's men waited for another sound, any sign she was still up there. Then the channel crackled one last time. She said quietly, "Tell command, Iron Widow's mission is complete." "Negative! You're not finished! We can mark targets, we can—" She said quietly, "No, you can go home now." Her tone wasn't defiant. It was final. She had come full circle, back to the battlefield that had taken her, back to the ghosts she'd never buried. The A-10 climbed higher, the last of its ammunition spent. The right engine finally gave out, coughing smoke that trailed like a veil across the rising sun. But even as systems failed, her hands remained steady on the controls. She didn't need gauges to tell her what came next. Some pilots land their planes. Others become them. Down below, Harding felt a chill despite the heat. He didn't know if she could still hear him, but he said it anyway. "Iron Widow, you brought us back. Don't disappear on us now." Her voice returned, softer this time, as though it was coming from miles away. "You can't lose what was never gone." The radar blinked once more. Her signal faded, then reappeared, not at ground level, but high, too high for the wounded A-10 to realistically reach. The technicians in Harding's team looked at the data, confused. "That can't be right. She's above 10,000 and climbing." He smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said, "that sounds like her." The last they saw of her was a flash cutting through the upper cloud line, a streak of fire swallowed by sunlight. Command later called it radar interference. Harding called it what it was, the return of a ghost that refused to stay buried. And somewhere above the desert, the sound of a warthog's engines lingered a few seconds longer than physics should have allowed. By the time the firing stopped, the desert was unrecognizable. Smoke covered the horizon like a storm that had lost its thunder. The SEALs moved carefully between twisted vehicles and scattered shells, the ground still hot enough to burn through their boots. Harding held his rifle across his chest, eyes fixed on the sky. He kept expecting the engines to return, that deep, mechanical growl that meant she was still up there, that the impossible was still happening. But the sky was empty now. Nothing moved. The last they heard was her voice, calm, detached, final. Iron Widow's mission is complete. Harding didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in her. They spent hours scanning for wreckage, for anything that could tell them what had happened. The radar data made no sense. 1 second, her signal had dropped below ground level. The next, it had climbed far above atmospheric range, as if she'd punched through the limits of the aircraft itself. Command dismissed it as interference. Harding didn't bother arguing. He knew what he'd seen. She hadn't vanished. She'd ascended.
At dusk, the recovery team arrived. Drones swept the area, capturing footage of what was left of Iron Hangar. There wasn't much. The runways were black scars across the desert, the hangars reduced to hollow ribs of steel. Yet, in the midst of all that ruin, one thing stood untouched: a single patch of concrete at the far end of the field, scorched but intact. There, burned into the surface, was the faint outline of a call sign: Iron Widow, melted into the concrete as if carved by the heat of her final pass. Harding knelt beside it, fingertips brushing the edges. It wasn't possible. Nothing should have survived that fire, but somehow, her mark had. He stayed there long after the others had gone, watching the sun sink into the dunes. The wind carried the smell of metal and ash, the same scent that had followed every sortie she'd flown. And as the light faded, he finally understood what her name had meant. Years earlier, during the classified mission that erased her squadron, Iron Widow had been the only survivor. Her wingman, the one person she'd trusted, had gone down covering her escape. She'd buried him herself under a half-buried fuselage, swearing she'd never fly again. When command branded her mission a failure, she took the blame, disappeared, and carried the ghost of that promise into exile. She wasn't called Widow because she lost someone she loved. She was called Widow because she outlived every soul who ever flew beside her. And when the world forgot her, she became exactly what they made her: iron and silence. That night, the SEALs bivouacked near the ruins. The stars came out one by one, bright against the black emptiness. Somewhere in the distance, a faint rumble echoed, too slow to be artillery, too steady to be thunder. Harding lifted his head. "Do you hear that?" a younger SEAL asked quietly. He nodded. "Yeah, sounds like engines." The younger man frowned. "There's nothing scheduled for tonight." Harding didn't answer. He just watched the sky until the sound faded, the way one watches a departing friend who doesn't believe in goodbyes. They would never see her again, but they would always hear her first. Days later, the report came in. The region stabilized, enemy positions destroyed, all survivors extracted. Command credited the SEAL team for a coordinated ground victory. There was no mention of Iron Widow, no radar logs, no recordings, just an empty space in the official transcript. But the SEALs kept their own version of the story. They didn't call it a miracle or a myth. They called it a reminder that sometimes salvation wears no insignia, no rank, no recognition. Sometimes it simply walks out of the fire, gets back into the cockpit, and flies until the sky remembers her name.
Weeks later, at an airbase hundreds of miles away, a mechanic checking satellite feeds found an anomaly, a blip at high altitude, moving too slowly to be a fighter, too fast to be a drone. It carried no transponder, no signature, just one line of data. Call sign: Iron Widow. And before anyone could trace it, the signal vanished into open air. 3 weeks after the battle, the desert breathed again. Wind combed the dunes, softening craters until they looked like the work of time, not fire. Iron Hangar remained a skeleton of steel, ribs of twisted beams pointing at a colorless sky. The crews spoke in low voices. The loudest thing on base was absence.
Major Harding stood at the perimeter fence with a clipboard he no longer needed. He kept hearing it at night, a vibration on the edge of hearing, too steady for wind, too patient for generators. The others said it was metal cooling. He didn't argue. Men who've lived long with war recognize the difference between weather and engines. Inside the command tent, he opened the final debrief. Operation Iron Gate closed. Clean language, colder truths. The SEAL team credited for decisive ground recovery. Enemy armor destroyed. Minimal losses. No mention of the A-10 that dragged the sky back down to them. No line for the woman who refused to die. Until the footnote. Unidentified friendly aircraft observed during extraction. No visual confirmation. No pilot recovered. He almost laughed. A miracle, reduced to 12 words and an apology. A black envelope slid free from the binder when he closed it. No seal, no stamp, just weight. Inside, a scorched memory stick, its face hand-etched with 3 words. Iron Widow. Harding stared at it, then fed it to the terminal like a confession. Static. A cockpit swam into view, cracked canopy, smoke. Sun burning the horizon into a white wound. Her voice arrived as if from another room, level, unhurried, unafraid. If this message reaches anyone, tell them the mission was never revenge. The camera shook as the jet banked. Her glove crossed the panel, steadying the instrumentation, a reflex older than the war. It was remembrance, she continued. For every pilot erased when silence became convenient. They called me Iron Widow because I outlived everyone I flew beside. But I didn't fly to survive them. I flew so their names wouldn't. The feed flickered. A bloom of light washed the glass. Her profile appeared, ash on her cheek, calm in her eyes. If you're hearing this, you made it home. That's enough. Static took the rest. The screen went dark. The tent seemed smaller for the lack of her voice.
Harding pocketed the drive. Outside, evening folded over the compound, the air tasting of aluminum and dust. He walked the length of the ruined runway, boots tapping on areas where concrete still remembered being a path out and back. The wind freshened. Somewhere far beyond the wire, thunder rolled, or something like it. Some ghosts don't haunt places. They haunt the air they once commanded. He stopped at the painted numbers, now blistered and half erased, and listened. At first, only wind. Then a hum, far and faint, rising from the horizon like a rumor. The kind of sound that makes old sergeants look up without meaning to. The kind of sound that chooses its witnesses. He looked skyward. The clouds were iron gray, the moon a coin behind gauze. No strobes, no nav lights, just a thin vein of silver sliding east, and under it the slow, patient growl of twin turbines. He didn't salute. There was no protocol for this. He simply spoke to the dark. Mission complete, Iron Widow. We'll take it from here. The sound thinned to a line, then to a memory. The wind reclaimed the field. Yet for a handful of seconds the air still trembled, as if the earth itself refused to let go of her weight. Harding turned back toward camp. He hesitated, then looked once more over his shoulder. Moonlight caught 2 parallel scrapes in the scorched concrete, a shape like wings, tapering into a single track leading toward the open desert. He smiled despite himself. The ground keeps its own logbook. They say the desert forgets. It sands down names and files edges off stories until what happened might as well have happened elsewhere to other people. But not her.
Iron Widow lived in the pauses between transmissions, in the half-second before a radio answers, in the breath the squad takes when the sky finally speaks. If you ever stand alone beneath a starless ceiling and feel the soil hum through your boots, don't mistake it for weather. Don't call it thunder. Listen. That's a warthog flying low and quiet. That's a promise, keeping itself. And if you listen long enough, you'll hear the names riding in its wake. Still,